student ambassador, Shauna-Kaye Brown, and introduce you to our other ambassador, Kittie Cooper. They are both graduate students from our Contemporary Arts program and have been sharing their knowledge and experience with student presenters by providing them advice and support. I'd like to give a big thank you to them, as well as our student presenters, for all their hard work, which resulted in some amazing presentations. Now I'll welcome Kittie and Shauna-Kaye along with our alumni panelists to the stage.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's been such a wonderful experience being here with everyone, sharing and learning and just witnessing all of these amazing presentations. So we're really happy to be here with you today. And as Victoria said, my name is Shauna-Kaye, and I'm joined by Kittie and our alumni panelists. And from communications, we have Janice Cheng. Now, Janice is currently head of community at Pineapple, a Gen Z tech startup. Previously, she spent 2 years at Bloom as the brand manager and copywriter, where she discovered her love for brand marketing and writing, even freelancing here and there. During her studies, she did a co-op with the BC Lions Football Club and later at SFU FCAT. From publishing, we have Jaiden Dembo. Jaiden is currently the marketing and publicity manager at Arsenal Pulp Press. In 2018-19, she attended the Masters of Publishing program at SFU, where she began an internship with Arsenal Pulp Press, which developed into her current position. During her undergrad, Jaiden was involved with the World Literature's literary magazine, The Lair, as the editor-in-chief. Now I'll hand over to Kittie to finish the introductions.
Thank you. Our next alum is from the School for the Interactive Arts and Technology, and Justin Ma. Justin is currently staff designer at LinkedIn, and he works as the lead designer for the mobile application that recruiters use to find candidates. During his time at SFU, he acted as the student union president for 2 years. As president, he organized events like portfolio workshops and sat in panels with the professors to provide a student's point of view for school affairs. Now for our last alum, from SCA, we have Heather Lamoureux. Heather is currently the artistic director at Vines and has grown with the festival since its beginning over the past 7 years. Outside of Vines, she utilizes her somatic education training from Tamalpa Institute to facilitate movement and expressive arts classes. While at SFU, Heather co-produced multiple shows, including the Dance Student Show and her grad show, I'll Decide. With that, we'll get started with our first question. People who are in the audience can put them in the chat too, and we'll be able to see them and read them out to the alumni. And just to get us started, we were wondering, and any or all of you can speak to this, a lot of the students in FCAT are finishing up their time at SFU, and quite a few of them are graduating soon. So we were wondering if you had any advice on how to figure out what you want to do, like get out there and gain experience, things to do as you're leaving school and right after you leave school to sort of get you started on your next thing.
You want to go first?
I'm happy to go first. So yeah, I studied communications, graduated 2.5 years ago, and what I did was attended union events. So for me, it was the CMNS. I didn't have a network at all. I actually didn't have many friends till later in my undergrad, but that's how I met people. And I started meeting not only the people that they would bring into events, but also just the students, whether they were the same age as me or even a year older than me. And through conversations, it unlocked a lot of doors, which sounds silly, but I'm like, I could have just spoken to them next to me in lecture, and I wish I did that sooner. So that's what I would say is like, have conversation, because it's important to figure out what you like and also maybe what you don't like.
I definitely agree with that. I would recommend similar advice, but on top of that too, I would recommend just getting out there and learning more about the potential fields you're interested in. So when, even in the middle of undergrad or even at the end, I definitely went and attended a lot of conferences. I know the world's in a bit of a weird state now, and conferences are a little bit harder to attend in person, but regardless, you can still learn a lot by hearing people talk about the work they do, the thoughts that they have into it. And the more you learn about a field, the more you'll be like, oh, this is really interesting, or like, oh, I don't like that about this certain thing. So just by being exposed to a lot of the professional environments that you could potentially go into, I think you'll start to find an interest of what's really, intriguing you, and naturally it'll pull you in that direction.
Yeah, I think you can also do volunteer work, which is I've done as well. And every organization has spots in different departments that you can kind of like low risk experiment with what you like. There's always a marketing position. There's always a comms position, even design positions. And you don't have to go like full in, like you only pick one organization you're interested in, do once a week. It's not like a full-time thing. Obviously it's unpaid. So that is your time, but I think there's a lot of experience there that you can add to your resume and then turn it into a paid position.
Yeah, and I'd add in the arts, a lot of the work that people end up getting is so relational, and the more spaces you can be in, the more shows you can be at, the more events you can be at, the more resonance you'll have with the community, and just getting those relationships deeper and deeper, and figuring out, which part of the art community is like your home. And I'd also say that as I went along with my journey of, finding my role in the community, that I found out that there were so many jobs that like I didn't even know they had job titles for. And so just to say, to be open to not knowing that there may be a job that you want that you didn't even know has a name. And that's a really cool thing to just continue to be open to.
Okay, and while we're on the topic of like approaching organizations and stuff, right? Do you have any tips in terms of how to make your resume stand out? Like, good steps to take when approaching organizations as well could also be good advice to share.
I think language is really important. You really want to look at the app, like the posting for the job, and mirror the language in it. Take from it what applies to you. Okay, so maybe you don't have experience with, I don't know, some kind of software, but you do have experience with talking and like doing public speaking. Mm-hmm. So pull that language from their app, like from the posting, and use it in your resume, use it in your cover letter. I think it also, I've been hearing from recruiters that kind of depends on the organization you're applying to. Some have software that just automatically reads resumes and will edit you out if you're not matching the language correctly. And so it doesn't matter if you have a pretty resume. It matters if you have the proper language. I mean, obviously, it depends on the organization you're applying to and like the position you're applying to. If you're doing something for design, you want to have something a little more polished in the design aspect. But yeah, that was, I think language is huge. As someone who works with language every day, I feel like it's important.
I definitely agree with that. I would say for your resume, be result driven in how you're writing. So if it's not the results of a project, you can also talk about the results of a good attitude. It sounds a bit silly, but it really goes a long way. I come from the startup world, and sometimes that's all it really takes is a good attitude to try and test and fail and try again. So if you can portray that in a resume, that will, to me, like really stand out. And coming from a marketing perspective too, take your socials. If you're trying, not only if you're trying to get into a social media role, but if you're active on Twitter, if that's TikTok for you and you're into content creation, or even your LinkedIn, like take it all, because your resume is just a piece of paper, but show them that you're also everywhere, and that you maybe even have a personal brand to offer.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think like, for me, the cover letter is really important in showing your personality, what your values are. In the arts, that's so important to show like who you're in relationship to. in our community, working really closely with Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and other Indigenous folks, like really showing respect to the communities that you'll end up working with is important. And yeah, I think if you're just beginning and you don't have like all of the, details on the resume, it doesn't stop you from showing who you are, and that often can be enough, especially in the arts. If you're looking for an administration job, there's always people wanting people who are good at that. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
So, I mean, everyone gave really good answers. I'm going to give something that's like slightly not answering the question, but sort of in that realm. So with the whole assumption that, the resume is to get your foot in the door, I have access to some of these stats, and I wrote an article about this one, so I have it on hand. Out of 2,700,000 applicants on LinkedIn and Indeed, only 168,000 make it to interviews. That's a 0.62 conversion. That's like not very good. And if you talk about just how many people get hired, only 7,000 out of 500 of those applicants actually got hired. So that's a 0.003% conversion. Doesn't sound very great. So essentially where I'm going with that is resumes are really important, and take all the advice that was given to you. But my recommendation would be actually to start reaching out to networks and referrals. Those actually skip, like a lot of referrals actually immediately go into the interview process. So you're really skipping from like going straight to that 0.62% conversion, right? It's one of the things that I highly recommend doing. Like, even if you don't have the strongest connection to a company, if you're interested in a job, see if there's any semblance of a connection you have. That might be like, oh, alumni works there that also went to your school. It might be a friend of a friend of a friend, right? Like, the thing that I hear quite often is it's not your network that will get you your next job. It's who they know that will get you your next job. And that definitely applied for me when I got my job at LinkedIn. It was for a referral. So that would be my recommendation, would be take all the resume advice that you just heard, but also on top of that, make sure you're reaching out to your network, because that's just going to increase your chance so much more.
I have to agree. If I could say, just like make friends with people you admire. That will take you really far.
Great. Thank you so much for all that advice. Yeah, I think that it's nice to have some really concrete things you can do with your resume, and then also the sort of bigger picture of trying to make connections with people and like get working early in your time at SFU. Our next question actually came from Shauna-Kaye and I meeting with students. We met with them as they were turning their papers and projects into presentations for the panels that we just had. And something that was coming up a lot was questions about how to find your own voice as an academic and professional. And so, Justin, I know you already mentioned conferences, and I suspect that other people have done that too. And where like a lot of people just finished presenting at them. And it was something that they were all thinking about, like, how do I fit myself into these scenes of like academia and like whatever job you end up in.
So I guess maybe I can give a thought there too, to expand on top of like the whole conference things. Like, conferences like these are great for learning more, but I guess to develop your voice and your own thoughts in whatever field you end up going in, just stay hungry, but keep questioning things, right? So especially when I started working, right, the first thing I always looked to was like, okay, what can I learn from other designers that have been around longer? And then sometimes they would actually make some weird decisions that I'm like, oh, but maybe they know what they're doing. I'm just gonna follow along, and I kind of stopped questioning it. Later on, I realized I just didn't think about some of the different perspectives that I also brought to the table. So even though you can learn a lot from everyone around you, always just keep questioning things. And that way you'll also be able to develop your own perspectives and your own kind of set of values and principles that guide you along your work. It's always good to absorb from others, but never forget kind of what you can bring to the table as well.
Yeah, I would say my path is more, I founded the organization that I now work full-time for. And so I've had to do like a lot of decision making, a lot of like risk taking, a lot of like trusting in something that's not real yet, and all of that. So I would say within that, the things that have really helped me is I have spent a lot of time on my healing, personally, so that I'm prepared to take care of the responsibility that I'm taking on, and so that I have, I have the strength, within myself to like be responsive to everything going on around me. And within that too, I think it's really important to spend time reflecting. Like, we're often told to keep going, 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 but we need to take time and be really intentional about that time to reflect on what actually is resonating with us, and do we need to switch pathways and all of that kind of stuff, to find our own voice. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think building on what Heather said, like following, this is so cliche, but like following what drives you, what makes you passionate. It helps. You want to enjoy life, so you want to do things that bring you joy. And it's not always what you think it's going to be. I think that's the thing. Like when I went into publishing, I went in as a writer and thought I would be an editor, and ended up in marketing. And I prefer it like much more because I actually get to do writing in this role, and work with people and authors, whereas editing was a lot more solitary. So, being open to shifting your direction as well, not being pigeonholed into a vision of how you would like things to be. I think someone had mentioned earlier about being open, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, for me, finding my voice as a young academic was like positioning I sat in front of class. I started to sit in front of class instead of the back row, and that's how I started finding my voice. I don't know, I started raising my hand more, I started talking in tutorials more, and I'm like, wow, what a difference it made to my experience. And then that gave me confidence to, I don't know, transition into my career after undergrad, because I realized the things I was speaking about, those were my passions. And then I was also realizing what I wasn't passionate about. So I would like lean away from that a little bit. But I would physically, now I know, I'm like, okay, I'm going to continue putting myself in front of the people and the things that I like, and nurturing like my voice that way.
Wow,
I actually really like that. I mean, this sounds really simple, but honestly, like the idea of metaphorically putting yourself in the front of the classroom just kind of means you're engaging a lot more conversations, right? It's like, do you just hold a thought and keep it to yourself, or do you just put it out there, right? I mean, the one thing I would say is like when you do that, just also then be open to maybe you're wrong. But unless you have these type of in conversations, you'll never really know and grow with your thoughts. So yes, that sounds like a really simple thing, but the idea of being at the front of your classroom can also travel outside of the academic setting too, into a professional setting too. So I love that answer.
Yeah, that's amazing. That perspective is very appropriate for the next question I'm gonna ask. Because no, what is a piece of advice that you would give to your undergraduate self?
As much as the hustle is needed, be careful with your time and give yourself lots of rest. I think something you are not taught in undergrad is how to budget your time, how to take care of yourself, because you will find yourself burnt out. If you're working at the rate you work at in your undergrad in a like corporate environment, you will burn out. It is not an if, it is a when. So building in those self-care routines, so important. Just please do it. I'm like begging my undergrad self, like, you need to relax. It doesn't mean you don't work hard. It just means you have to set boundaries for yourself. You're not going to work overtime if they're not going to pay you for it. You're not going to stay at the office until 9 p.m. at night unless they're going to pay you for it. You need to put those boundaries between you and work, and you'll thank yourself for it. So my big advice.
Huge plus one to that. I mean, that's probably what I would tell my undergrad self too. The idea, it can feel like you need to work really hard, especially when you're first starting off. It's like, oh, I need to prove it to myself. I need my peers to know that I'm capable at what I'm doing. So it doesn't matter if I'm going to spend those extra hours. But looking back, I definitely do question like, oh, why did I do that? Like it may have like sped it up by a bit, but that process was like pretty painful to deal with, some like the life burnouts along the way. So you definitely need to take care of yourself along the journey. And I know it can feel especially hard, especially as you're starting your career, but keep the advice in the back of your mind. Know what you need to do to make yourself relaxed and make sure you do it.
Yeah, I love that. I think I learned last year through the pandemic something about focusing on energy management versus time management, because we all have 24 hours in the day, but you can have hours left in the evening, but if you don't have the energy, it doesn't mean anything. So that's what I would tell myself as well, along with the rest of them. But I would also tell myself to make more friends. In my 5th year, that's when I made my first friend. And I'm like, I would always wonder how people made friends on campus, if I'm being really honest. I'm like, I don't have anyone to sit with, but it's actually so easy, and it really made a difference to my experience. So put yourself out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I'd also add that I think like not everything is easy, and like you're not going to be where you want to be right away. Yeah, I don't think we should have like the expectation that like perfection is coming as soon as we graduate from school, but instead more that we're, I've found when I think back, each job that I had leading to where I am, there's like an egg or a seed within each of those roles that I took on that are really vital to who I am now and are really vital to my skill sets now. And so to just kind of be like searching for what those are, even if you're not like fully satisfied with everything that you're doing, yeah, there's value to it.
Amazing. Thank you all for that advice. I'm really happy to hear the emphasis on taking care of yourself. I think that's something that we all need to hear and be reminded of more often, especially in these settings. I think, Heather, this will tie into the last point that you were making really well. One of the questions we wanted to ask you all is like expectations you should have when you're applying for your first jobs for after school, and things to like look out for and do then.
This is not an expectation, but the law of assumption really worked for me. Kind of like the law of attraction, but that's something I would tell like any undergrad looking for their job soon, is like assume that you're going to get it, but also know that you might not. Because if you act like it's yours, you're confident, that energy will really translate, I think, to the employer. But an expectation I would share is maybe like entry-level jobs, you might not you probably won't get your dream salary right away, but how you could look at it is the experience you're going to gain to lead you one step closer to your dream salary. The people you're going to meet that will open new doors to take you to that dream salary. The health benefits, do they give you mental health days? How do they treat burnout culture? Like, ask those questions, because while the dollar sign can be attractive, it really doesn't matter in the long run if you're unhappy at the company you're at. So look at the full package when you are deciding on a job, not only on deciding when you're applying, but deciding on accepting roles as well.
Yeah, I think like to build on that, like look at the mission statement of the companies you're applying for and ask questions about the culture within the company. That's super important. If you have a bunch of burnt out employees who hate their lives, like it's not Doesn't matter if you're getting paid 100K. I mean, maybe it does, but like, I don't know. I prefer not. And that you can also always like move laterally within a company as well, just as well as up. So, you know, if you are in a space that you really enjoy the culture, the people, what the company stands for, but not exactly the role, you can always shift around. And so, you know, keep that in mind. And again, like someone else made this point too, it's like it may not be a position you thought you wanted, but you ended up enjoying anyway. And then also, yeah, just shoot your shot, I guess. Like you can apply to something and only meet like 60% of the ask, but apply anyway. Who knows? You know, maybe you have the qualities that they are prioritizing. Sure, you're not an Excel wizard, but you are an incredibly gifted writer. So that's you can learn things. You can learn the skills they want, it's in the application. So that's the other thing I would say.
Yeah, I mean, to build upon that too, I think even just to share a story from my past, one of the first things I did was, I know this is an internship and not a full-time job, but one of the internships I applied for was like a web developer role, right? And I work under the field of design, but I didn't know how to code some websites. I was like, oh, I don't mind brushing this, and I'll practice design on the side. I went and applied for it, and then they reached back out to me and they're like, aren't you a designer? And I'm like, yeah, but I can't code. And like, well, actually, we need a designer too. So they hired me as a designer instead. So kind of like what everyone else is saying, just shoot your shot. You don't know where things are going to land, right? But definitely kind of to everyone's point, you may not land that immediate dream job as your first job, and that's okay. But I think what might help is if you yourself knew what the must-haves were for your job, right? I mean, everyone's going to have the list of everything that they want from a job, but what are the deal breakers, right? And make sure that you kind of have those more firmly set in stone for yourself, and like kind of, you know, evaluate it and think about it personally, because I think these will also help you think about these other questions to ask your employers when you interview with them ultimately, right? It's like what are the things that you're curious about in terms of their company culture? You might not have those questions on hand unless you personally know what you want from a company. And anytime someone comes in like very enthusiastic with full of questions about the company, I always treat it as like, oh, that person is more interested, you know, in their potential job. So having a lot of these little things, I think, will help you towards those steps.
Yeah, I feel like this is a tough question if you're like a dance or a theater or a visual arts or a music major. Because there just like isn't a job like at first. It's just not a thing. It's just really probably not going to happen, to be honest. Really, you have to make it work. You have to make contracts together. You have to probably work as like you probably need a second role, like either as a server or as a whatever, teacher, yoga teacher, whatever it is. But the reality is, just to be honest, if you want to be those things at the beginning, you're not going to have a full-time job. So I would say the expectation is to like find something that you can manage alongside it to give yourself some stability, and yeah, just find something that like doesn't deplete you to the point that you hate your art job, really. And there are those things out there, and you just have to find the right combination, and I think that's my recommendation at that point. Mm-hmm.
Also, if you're nervous about the actual application process of a job, I really recommend going through co-op. I should have mentioned it earlier, but go through co-op. If you want to try like the application process, the interviewing, that in itself is so much learning that you can kind of shake the jitters off before you graduate, just so you have some guidance. So yeah, Liesl, if you're out there, thank you for helping me with my jitters.
So with that then, wrapping up now, do you have any advice, any tidbits, anything you really want to share with, you know, our undergrads who are like watching, probably just like soaking everything up?
Get out there and just try things. I mean, personally for me, I learned the most when I was doing a bunch of internships. So it took a really long time for me to graduate. I think the expected like graduation process was like 4 years for SIAT, right? but I think it took like 7 years because I would stop like studying, and when I went into my internships, I just full on did internships, and I learned so much about the field, right? Again, like for me, it validated that I really did want to be in the field I was in, and it helped me kind of grow as an individual. So that's my advice. Just get out there and try to do as much as you can. And even if it's not an internship, join like clubs, student unions, things like that. Like get out and do things that are kind of in that field and give you the taste of what you can do in that field. Like sometimes when I'm looking at like intern applicants, it's not really necessarily what they've done, but like what are they doing on the side? What are they passionate about, right? And that type of stuff can really speak volumes about a person's character.
Yeah, and kind of on the note that there isn't a time pressure. I think like we go into undergrads thinking you got to get done in 4 years, and it's like I actually think there's a lot more value to stretching it out and doing co-ops and taking time to volunteer, because at the end of the day, it is those connections you make when in those co-op positions, internships, clubs that get you the job, as we've kind of talked about before. So don't feel that you need to do this in 4 years. Like take your time with it. I think I took 5 years to complete my undergrad. So and I did volunteer and I did co-op, and I'm so glad that I did because it got me here. So don't put that pressure on yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I would say too that maybe you do like that. You may need to further your training in a more specified way after a few years. That's what I did. I finished my dance and business degree, and then I worked for a few years, and then I decided I wanted to experience more about like somatic healing practices, and that really like was kind of like the final piece that pulled all the puzzle pieces of my work together. And so there may be things that you need to continue studying later on, and of course I know that's challenging with juggling work and everything, but just being open, and they could be like through mentorship opportunities with somebody you admire, or they could be through like a summer 2-week program, just being open that you're going to potentially need to piecemeal some more knowledge together to really like define your individual like gift or role to your community.
I can't add much more than like be kind. The city is small. Like you're gonna run into people that you sat with that you never spoke to, and maybe you become best friends. So yeah, be kind to the people you meet. It's really cool to see everyone graduate actually and do their own things, because you're like, dang it, I wish I spoke to you in class. So yeah, and then I would say don't be afraid to ask for help, because what you're feeling, if you have any struggles, there's very likely someone else feeling the same way. So always know that there's definitely nice people out there. So do ask for help.
I had a question for Heather, and also I don't know if any of the rest of you have experience with this too, but would you mind talking a little bit more about like founding your organization and what that was like? And I guess if anyone else wants to talk, you could talk about like finding and creating roles for yourself that seem right.
Yeah, so I founded Vines 8 years ago, and it's just now in this last few years that it's been stable enough that it's my main role, like my main job, and that I have a staff of about 5 part-time workers. But yeah, it really started out very small, and essentially came from like a real desire to see performing arts in public spaces and work with activists around blending activism and arts together. And I while I was developing what Vines was, you know, doing all those things, starting a nonprofit, learning all the management skills, I also was actively working for Push Festival and the Fire Hall and various other organizations. So I was working within jobs that were directly giving me skills that I could use as I was also developing my own project. And so, yeah, that kind of like, you know, essentially it was like a little bit Vines and really a lot of other people's work. And then eventually it just came to a midpoint, and then it switched at some point. So it was a journey of finding jobs that would give me the skill sets and the knowledge I needed to further Vines, and then to really like stick true to the purpose of Vines and continue to learn from the community. And really, it wouldn't be successful in any way if the community that I work so closely with didn't engage with it. So I really I think the reason it exists is because there's a need for it. So I really followed the community's need, and not just like my own ideas, to ensure that that it's held by more people than just me. So yeah, that's a little bit of how it all came together. Of course, a lot of grant writing, a lot of learning about budgets, a lot of all of that stuff as well.
Did anyone else have any input in terms of like creating your own, you know, like literally clearing your own path?
I mean, my position at Arsenal didn't exist before I was there. So it was a position that was created to keep me. And similar to Heather's story, I was initially hired on as like a part-time contract worker for them as a publicist. And I piecemealed other jobs to keep, you know, myself out of debt. And while I worked part-time with them, until, I mean, the press became successful enough to hire me on full-time. I mean, that didn't really have much to do with me, more that it did that our authors were very successful, that we won multiple awards. Our books won Canada Reads last year, yes. And so it gave us the funding we needed to hire me full-time. But I mean, advice I got from another editor in publishing when I was doing the MPub was to make yourself indispensable. It's make yourself someone they can't live without. I don't know if I necessarily did that because they just really needed someone in the marketing department. Having one person run all of the marketing for 300 books is a little bit nuts. But it, you know, to show your passion and to make it work can pay off in the long run. You just stick it out if it's something you're really passionate about and love and believe in.
I have a similar story to Jaiden. When I graduated, I applied for an executive assistant role at Bloom, a startup, and someone actually told me, "Oh, you don't want an assistant role." And I'm like, "What do you mean I don't want it? I would love this role." And it was more so the description that appealed to me than the title. And I thought how much that would have set me back if I was fussed about the title right out of graduation. And I think I was an executive assistant for a year. And then my second year, I was actually the brand manager. That role, again, also didn't exist. But they're like, okay, we're at a stage where we are ready to have someone in this role. And I learned what I needed to as the assistant. And I was so glad that I let myself. I don't know. And I'm like, don't be held back by titles, because you really never know what that's going to lead you to. And I just think how many people could have became assistants and been taken somewhere further. So
It's not really the same thing as everyone else. I guess like I didn't start my own company or things like that, but definitely like what the question made me think about was an intern experience as well. So there was one that I went in, and the first day I got in, the person who hired me actually was like packing their stuff, like they were like literally leaving, and I was like, wait, but I'm just starting. So what do I do? And they're like, oh well, there's the marketing team, so you can go help them out. And I want to focus more on the user experience part of like my career rather than just creating like ads or things like that. So it ended up that there was a website that was completely neglected but really desired, and we used to the company reached out to contractors to work. So this was at SAP, and just because no one was working on it, I was like, hey, I could do a better job. I could fix all this stuff. I ended up just jumping into it, and I made it my own project, even though like I was just an intern. And I worked with people from like, so while I was in Vancouver, I worked with people from San Jose, and they ended up liking my work so much that I was kind of like the main point person. And one Friday, they even called me, and they essentially like booked a flight, gave me like a rental car and all of this stuff as an intern, and they flew me down to San Jose because like they really valued the work I was doing so much. I think in the end, it's just like, can you spot opportunities and chase them? Like even if you weren't hired for it, can you do it and kind of like pursue down that path? What I was told during that internship, and this is like the one thing that stood with me, is like in the time of chaos, there's a lot of opportunity, right? So if things are going wrong, just see like, well, things are going wrong. What can I do, right? And then be the one to like kind of step in there and see if you can make a difference.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you all so much for joining us and bringing your wisdom and advice to these students. I know I really appreciated many of the things that you were saying was saving them in my brain, and I'm sure that they were doing the same too, as people who will like soon be tackling many of the things that you're talking about. So yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you at the next, or at the closing remarks in just a second.
It was a pleasure. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All right, thank you to our alumni and ambassadors for a really great Q&A session. Welcome also to our closing session of the afternoon. I hope you enjoyed all of the presentations as much as I did. Congratulations to all the student presenters on their wonderful achievements. We hope you enjoyed your time being here, and we hope that the memories and the connections you've made today will stay with you always. As we begin to wrap up for the afternoon, I would like to take this moment to acknowledge all of the people that made this conference possible. And while I can't see you, you can applaud in the chat. First of all, thank you to the UGC committee and helpers, Andrea Barbera, Naomi Liu, Tessa Perkins-Deneau, Nicole Manson, Victoria San Martin, Stephanie Greaves, and Natalie Brenton. Thank you to the SCA graduate student ambassadors, Shauna-Kaye Brown and Kittie Cooper. Thanks to the FCAT communications team for sharing and promoting the event. The MEX Hop-In team, especially Josh Carway, Alenka Mishko, and Rachel Jones. Thank you to the FCAT staff volunteers, Philippe Pasquet, Kim Hockey, Kim O'Donnell, Zed Chia, Faria Rajput, and Alicia Aikenhead. Thank you to our alumni panel, Heather Lamoureux, Jaiden Dembo, Janice Cheng, and Justin Ma. And thank you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Jules Kustachin. I would also like to take this moment to thank all of our sponsors again, the Old Spaghetti Factory and Vancouver Water Adventures, for their gracious support of our event. And that concludes our closing remarks. Thank you everyone for coming out to support our students for our 12th annual FCAT Undergraduate Conference. Next up, we have a reception until 3:30, and the reception will be a chance for our students to hear next steps, like what you can do with your research, other conference opportunities, and you can even learn about FCAT's graduate programs. Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon.